Today's first lesson is from Deuteronomy, the 5th book of Moses. Moses is addressing the Israelites and charging them to remain steadfast to their God as they assemble in Moab before crossing into the Promised Land. Deuteronomy 30, verses 6 and 11 through 16. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants, so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. For this commandment, which I command you today, is not too mysterious for you, nor is it far off. It is not in heaven that you should say, who will ascend into heaven for us, and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it? Nor is it beyond the sea, that you should say, who will go over the sea for us, and bring it to us, so that we may see it, and hear it, and do it? But the word is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil, in that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments, his statutes, and his judgments, that you may live and multiply. And the Lord your God will bless you in the land which you go to possess. Thanks be to God for this reading from his holy text.
Thank you, Charlie. I think it would have been a hard thing to be one of Jesus' original 12 disciples. I've found myself at times thinking, well, it would have been easier, right, to be a Christian if you could live and see the miracles, see the stuff he was doing, watch him feed 5,000, raise Lazarus from the dead. That would have been easier than today, when we live in a broader culture that isn't so sure that Jesus was on track or that his followers were sane, and yet we identify ourselves with him. Do you remember a couple weeks ago in John 11 when Jesus said, I'm the resurrection and the life? How confusing it must have been. Jesus gets word that his dear friend is sick, so he decides to stay put for a couple days. And then he says, okay, friends, disciples, we're going to go wake up Lazarus because he's sleeping. They're like, well, if he's taking a nap, he'll get up on his own, and they want to kill us where he lives. Let's not go back there. And Jesus says, no, he's not really just sleeping. He's dead, and I'm glad for your sake. Let's go. Pretty baffling stuff. And in today's story, episode, comes from John chapter 14, and it's some familiar words, but I want to try to get into the context a little bit. In John 13, they're in the upper room, the last meal. And Jesus has laid some pretty heavy stuff on them, things that are disorienting and confusing. One of the things he does is he takes on the role of a servant, a household servant, and he washes their feet. And the disciples are uncomfortable with this. They're like, Jesus, why are you doing this? This is socially inappropriate. You're the master. We should be serving you, or at least the household servants should be, but you shouldn't be washing our feet. Peter says, I don't want anything to do with this. I don't get it. Jesus, what you do? And Jesus says, of course you're confused. You don't understand what I'm doing right now. So they're like, okay, we don't understand what you're doing. But then he says this. The text says he's very troubled. Jesus is troubled. The guy that they follow, they're banking their life on, and he's troubled, and he says this, one of you is gonna betray me. One of you is a traitor. He says this, imagine this intimate setting, 13 men who have for the better part of 3 years lived together, eaten together, camped out together, had all type of adventures where their lives were threatened, where they saw miracles performed. The guy who kept freaking them out by showing up on a lake in the middle of the night. I mean, he thought he was a ghost, but no, he's not a ghost. He's a guy walking on water, which is more frightening. I don't know. This is a confusing thing, and these guys have lived together. And he says, one of you is a traitor. The passage simply says the disciples looked at each other and were perplexed. And then one more level of confusion. He says, and here's another thing, by the way. I'm going away and you guys can't come. You can't follow me where I'm going. Well, they were troubled at this point. And Jesus knows they're troubled. And so he speaks words of comfort to them. It was a confusing thing to be his disciple. This is where we pick up in John 14, verse 1. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. And in my Father's house are many mansions. And if this were not so, I would have told you. But I go and I prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know. But Thomas said, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me. Well, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. And from now on, you do know him because you've seen him, said Jesus. But Philip responds, well, Lord, if you just show us the Father, then that'll be sufficient for us. Just give us a glimpse of God right now, and we won't have any more questions. But Jesus says, have I been with you so long, and yet you don't know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father in me? And the words I speak, I don't speak on my own, but they're from the Father who dwells in me, and I do his work. So believe me that I am in the Father and the Father in me, or else believe me just because the works that you've seen me do. Let me just make a few notes about this passage. And one is this, that it might be home base for followers of Jesus to be perplexed. Oftentimes in my life and Laura and our life together, we feel that something's gone wrong if we don't know what's next. If we've got a plan and it's working out and we can see where to go, then we feel like, yeah, this is where God wants us. But when things get confusing, we can't see the way, we're not sure what's around the next corner, we think, oh, maybe we're off track. Maybe God messed up. Maybe things aren't as they're supposed to be because we're so perplexed. Well, that might be home base for those who follow Jesus. It certainly was for his disciples. That doesn't mean that we're lost necessarily, but we can be perplexed. You know, the great American frontiersman Daniel Boone, he was in his old age, I think he was about 86. He'd lived quite a career as a frontiersman and a woodsman and a politician and a merchant and a real estate speculator, politician. And he was having his portrait painted by Chester Harding, who's one of America's great portraiture artists. And Chester asks him this while he's sitting for his portrait. He says, so, Mr. Boone, tell me, in all your adventures, have you ever been lost? And Boone thinks for a moment and he says, lost? No, I've never been lost. I was bewildered for 3 days once. Bewildered for 3 days. I can do better than that. I've been bewildered for about 3 decades, you know. But it doesn't mean we're lost. So being perplexed, not knowing exactly what's going to come next, is a normal state of affair for those who want to follow Jesus. The second thing is this. That's not cause for us to be afraid. As Jesus says, do not be afraid. Don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Trust in me too. Trust in me. Put your trust. I'm going ahead of you. There's this beautiful reference to Jesus in Hebrews 6, verse 20. It says he is the forerunner. He goes ahead of us into the Holy of Holies. It's just like John 14, he says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. the presence of the Father. In my Father's home, there are many mansions. In Hebrews 6 is talking about Jesus is going ahead as a forerunner into the holy places. And that word, forerunner, was used in the contemporary Greek. In two different ways in particular. The Greek word there was proromos. And it was used of military reconnaissance troops. The prodromai were the ones who were like the avant-garde. They would go ahead and scout out the territory, sneak in like spies to lay a path and to get a lay of things and to make the way certain and sure ahead of the main troops. Jesus says, I'm like that. Another use of that word, prodromos, was of the pilot ships into the Gulf of Alexandria. Just like many of our seacoast towns, big ships coming in are not piloted by the captain. Rather, someone local, a pilot, comes out, boards the ship, and then they navigate the route through these small channels, difficult and trying places. Jesus says, I'm like your pilot ship. I'm going before. I will do this. So you're not on your, you can't see around the bend, but guess what? I've already gone there. And that's the kind of leader that Jesus is. Jesus never leads from behind, telling us to do something or shouting commands for us to put ourselves out in danger's way. He only asks us to follow after where he has already gone. So we need not fear. We don't know what tomorrow brings. We don't know that, any of us. Calamity could strike on a personal level or family level or nationally, and we've kind of grown accustomed to that, haven't we? Natural disasters and political mishaps and calamities like the COVID virus. We don't know what's around the bend, but we know who is there with us. Like Jesus says, whatever the future holds, I'm there with you. I'll be there. So trust me. The third thing is simply this. You know, it was Thomas who asked, he said, Jesus, you said you're going away and we know the way that you're going. We don't even know where you're going, let alone the way, how to get there. And Jesus affirms this. He says, yes, you do. You do know the way, and the way is this. I am the way and the truth and the life. And Jesus said, my way of life, the way I'm inviting you into, all that's made possible because of my presence and my teaching and the power of my Spirit in you, that's the way to walk. Now, I would like to know this, really. If there was a Google map for your life, you know, you put in a destination, my death, you know, and it says calculating, and it shows you all the different paths and what to expect, where the exits are. I would be tempted to do that. I'd like to know. I'd like to see things. And Jesus says, no, it's not about seeing all those things ahead of time. It's living now, doing the way. To follow Jesus means to follow Jesus. That's an active doing. This notion of the way means a way of life. In fact, in the book of Acts, at least 6 times, what we call Christianity, or the church, was known as followers of the way, or those who practice the way, because it's a way of life, a way of being. What is the way forward? Well, the way is the way Jesus taught us. And we only know as much as we do. The way is not a thing that you can subscribe to or hold to just cognitively. It's a thing you got to walk into. You know, there's that passage in Luke where there's the rich man and Lazarus. Do you remember this story that Jesus told? There's a rich man and a poor guy, Lazarus, who lived at his gate, and the rich man paid no attention to him. Eventually, both of them die, and they end up, Lazarus, in the bosom of Abraham. But the rich man, he is separated by a gulf from Abraham, and he's tormented. And he says to Father Abraham, hey, let me go back and warn my family that they should live better. They should love their neighbors and not step over the poor, but rather care for them. Let me go back and warn. Abraham says, nah, I'm not going to let you do that. You lived your life, and that was it. And then he says, well, why don't you just send somebody back from the dead to warn them. And Abram just says, no. The truth is, if they didn't heed Moses, that is the law, if they didn't keep the law, and they didn't have ears for the prophet, even if someone returns from the dead, they won't believe them. And what Abram in that passage is saying is, if you don't do what you know to do, if you don't walk in the light that you're given, if you're not following the way as fully as you can now, more affirmation isn't going to make any difference for you. I think Jesus was also foretelling his own death. Even though he raises from the dead, it won't be enough, because the organ of revelation, that is the way we receive revelation, is through obedience. It comes through obedience, through the doing of it, the walking in it. I was reminded just this morning of a great American ethicist, John Cavanaugh, who contributed academically and professionally lots of ways, but he reached a juncture in his life where he needed a change. And he wasn't sure what it was, but he felt like God was moving him beyond the academic circles into something else. And he had the freedom to go to Calcutta and spend time with Mother Teresa, the Missionaries of Charity. And as he got there, as they were working, she received him and said, well, what is it that you want from me? And he said simply, I want you to pray for me. She said, okay, what do you want me to pray for you? And he said, I want clarity. Please pray for clarity. And here's Mother Teresa's reply. I won't do that. She says, I won't pray for you to have clarity. That's the last idol you're holding on to. That's the last thing you won't let go of. I'm not going to pray that you have clarity. Then she says this, I've never had clarity. I've never had clarity, but I've had trust. So that's what I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray that you have trust. Jesus said to his troubled disciples, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in the Father, trust in me. Walk in this way, and you will find that it leads to that place, Father's house with many rooms and room for all. Well, friends, this week, might we not ask for more knowledge or more clarity or more instruction, but rather the trust and the courage and perhaps the audacity to live in what we know as we follow Jesus in the way that he showed us. With the assurance that the one who knows us and calls us goes before us, and all that we need to know for today is amply supplied in his example. And let us consider how we might stir one another up to love and good deeds as we follow Christ together. Go in that hope.